All right. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to episode number 20 of MEI's Defense Leadership Series, hosted by myself, Bilal Saab. I am the director of the Defense and Security Program at MEI. I'm also an adjunct professor at Georgetown University's Security Studies program in the School of Foreign Service. More than 3.5 years ago, we launched this series frankly, as an excuse to have a conversation with some of the world's brightest minds on defense issues in the Middle East. The series was inaugurated with a conversation with currently retired U.S. Marine Corps General and former commander of CENTCOM, Frank McKenzie, who is now a teammate of mine at MEI. I have enjoyed every single episode since, and I certainly have learned a ton from them. But I have a feeling this conversation that we're going to have today is going to be incredibly interesting and informative for me, at least, because it's a subject I will confess I'm not well versed in, despite its strategic significance in the world of defense, and that is automation and artificial intelligence. And we could not have a better person and a better expert to discuss this issue than Sky Moore, the Chief Technology Officer with United States Central Command, that's CENTCOM. The Defense and Security Program has an institutional partnership with CENTCOM, but also has many personal friends with the command, including current Commander General Eric Kurilla. So any opportunity to speak with staff at the command, we will definitely take it. Sky's bio is on our website, but I will briefly introduce her. Sky is currently the Chief Technology Officer, as I said, for CENTCOM. She was previously the Chief Strategy Officer for Task Force 59, integrating unmanned systems and AI into fleet operations for Naval Central Command. That's the naval component of CENTCOM. She worked on the Hill as well. She has experience on Capitol Hill as a senior defense and foreign policy advisor at the U.S. House of Representatives for the Armed Services Committee. She's also served as a director of science and technology on the staff of the Defense Innovation Board in the Pentagon. She was named, this is pretty cool, she was named Forbes 30 under 30 in 2021. She holds a master's degree from school I am very much familiar with. That's Georgetown University as well. She has a master's degree in technology and security. She also has a bachelor from Harvard in government. As a reminder, this is an on-the-record conversation for, let's just say, a little less than an hour, broadcast live on our website, mei.edu, but also on YouTube. And if time permits, I'll be taking questions from the audience. I think I've said too much. With that, Sky, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to be here.
No, it's a pleasure. Okay, so why don't we just start with some basics? I'd love to know a little bit more about you, Sky. I don't think I've had a chance to converse with you before. I was incredibly excited to learn about your appointment with CENTCOM. I am very interested in what you're about to say. I'm also interested in learning from you about this subject. I will tell you it is a blind side in my research, including cyber, to be honest with you. So very much looking forward to this conversation. Why don't we just start with some basics? How did you get into AI issues? Tell us a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I think that it's not necessarily that I even anticipated to end up in this position. I don't know that technology was ever my initial intent. Originally, I was more interested in a broader question of how do you help warfighters get the tools they need. That was the question that I was trying to ask. I discovered early on that I was very passionate about national security. I felt that it was a mission that made me excited to get up and go to work. It's something that has driven me throughout my career. And then along that road, discovered that there were all of these resources and solutions that were out, whether in commercial sector or DoD, that could really make a difference for the people that I saw who were forward. And so that led me down the pathway of technology, and then a natural extension of that, of course, has included the conversation about AI because of the outsized impact that it can have on our mission set and the mission sets of those other folks in DoD. So I have fallen down the road of AI, I suppose, just by virtue of the fact that I've been trying to answer the question of what solutions exist that can help the warfighter, and increasingly AI has to be a part of that conversation.
Got it. Okay. So for someone who is starting their career and very much interested in this subject, because it's just all over the place, right? It's incredibly trendy. I know you studied technology and security, right, at Georgetown, but do you necessarily have to be a computer scientist to start these issues, or you could just come from different backgrounds and get into AI?
I think that there are definitely different backgrounds that you can take, as long as you stay very honest about what your technical limitations are and are not. Right. That's really the key. There is, and I think that there's also risk for folks who do have a technical background, who have computer science background or a machine learning background, to sometimes over-assert how they understand the problem set that they're applying AI to. So I think it would be really difficult to find somebody who has every single facet of the problem in question, whether it's the operational problem that you're trying to solve or the technical solution you're trying to apply. It's important for whoever is coming in to be very, very mindful of the gaps that they have and communicate those clearly, so that you don't waste time at worst and apply bad solutions, or waste time at best and apply bad solutions at worst.
Fair enough. Okay. How's your coding?
My coding is self-taught. So I actually started my career as an aerospace and defense consultant, and at that time I had little to no quantitative training at all. But I took that position because I wanted to build out that particular skill set, and I ended up spending upwards of 3 years building predictive models, but more focused on a business element or perspective, where we were looking at companies and what their projected revenues would be. I personally was really focused on defense budgeting and doing predictions out at a line-by-line basis, and so it gave me a pretty deep appreciation for all of the ways that data can be leveraged in an incredibly powerful way. It also gave me a sense of how data can lead you astray deeply if you aren't mindful about quality control, if you aren't mindful about how you're applying analytics. So I do not have formal training in data analytics or computer science. Everything that I've done from coding to modeling has been self-taught or taught by employers.
That is so incredibly impressive. And now that obviously there's a lot more that you want to learn about that space, but it's clear that you're doing such a fantastic job for you to be recognized, obviously, by CENTCOM and to come serve as a chief technology officer. But let me ask you, how did you develop an interest in the Middle East, right? Which is what we do here 24/7. And as a second part to that question, how did the relationship with CENTCOM come about? Did they find you? Did you seek them out? And did you do any training on the Middle East at Georgetown or anywhere else? Why are you not working at UCOM right now? Why are you not working at AFRICOM? Why CENTCOM?
So to start, my relationship with CENTCOM actually goes back much further than this position, because I was at, as you mentioned, I was at Task Force 5-9 out with NAVCENT directly before that. And so the last 2 to 3 years have really been very much focused on this region. But before that, my first entry point was actually nearly a decade or more ago. I taught at a school in Afghanistan. I was in college at the time, and I was really interested in the topic of Afghanistan, and increasingly I felt that I would always have a limitation on my understanding of the topic unless I physically went there. And so I found a women's boarding school that I was given the opportunity to teach at, and so that was actually really my first foray with CENTCOM. And it's very interesting now to have this full circle moment of coming back to a place that really sparked or solidified in many ways my passion for national security, because it was just so abundantly clear at that time that without national security, all of the other topics I was passionate about, whether it was women's education or otherwise, were impossible. So 10 years ago, I was in theater, but for very, very different reasons. And then fast forward to now, the reason that I came into this position was because Task Force 5-9 came to me and asked for me to bring my technical expertise to them as Chief Strategy Officer, and then I met General Carrillo through that engagement, where we were briefing him about what we were doing. He is a passionate advocate for innovation and technology adoption, and so he was really interested in what 5-9 was doing. And so then he stood up the Chief Technology Officer position and brought me on through that capacity. But why CENTCOM? I love this question because I think that there are few other places where I could possibly be learning and getting more hands-on experience and having more impact in this role. I recognize and appreciate that there are a broad set of priorities across the department that are all very, very important, but you would be hard-pressed to find a theater that is more active and live than CENTCOM. And that is where technology truly comes to bear. I increasingly believe that our ability to integrate technology is dependent on the speed at which we can get it to real users in as realistic of an environment as possible, and our theater provides that opportunity every single day. If you want to test a counter-UAS system, we have opportunities almost every single day for you to see whether or not it works. We have live data that will feed, whether we're talking about AI and models, whether we're talking about more basic data analytics, that will tell you immediately whether or not you are correct, because we have live operations going on a recurring basis. I think that the opportunity, it is a heavy responsibility that the commander holds, that the rest of the command holds, but with that heavy responsibility and high tempo of operations comes an opportunity to push forward technology in a way that would be difficult elsewhere.
Yeah, we're going to talk about those investments a little bit more later in the conversation, because I'm just fascinated by them. And obviously, just like you, I have a bias for CENTCOM, but for me to see the command making those investments in innovation, and actually not just theoretical, but actually happening in the theater, is just absolutely rewarding and fascinating. But I want to go back to something you mentioned about your teaching experience. I just don't want it to pass by so briefly, because I think it's just fascinating. Tell me a little bit more about that experience. Why did you decide to teach in Afghanistan in that boarding school, and what did you learn from it? Did you develop personal connections with the Afghans? Tell me a little bit more about that.
I was really lucky. I was fortunate to find a school that was willing to take me on at what was quite a young age at that time. I was teaching English. I was also teaching self-defense at that point. I had a skill set that I was able to help with some of the younger girls. And the school continues, again, to this day. It was the first women's boarding school ever stood up. And to me, that was such an incredible mission to support. The woman who runs that school, Shabana, is an incredible example. She had to dress as a male to go to school at all when she was growing up. She's just ruthlessly committed to the idea of women getting education. And so when I went there, a part of it certainly was to make sure that I understood Afghanistan as a country more, but I don't think I really processed before I got there how much being on the ground can teach you. And being on the ground and talking directly to the folks who are experiencing whatever scenario that you're learning about, there is nothing to replace that. And so my time teaching in Afghanistan gave me great appreciation for the strength of the people that lived in that country and what they were facing, of the importance of supporting them and contributing to national security so that they could live their lives in the way that they deserve. I continued to stay in touch with those students and mentor them for many years afterwards, for 5 or 6 years afterwards. I stay in touch with many of those female students. I'm fortunate to have those connections and to have had that experience. I learned a lot from it.
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that, Sky. Okay, so why don't we get into the promise of AI in U.S. Military activities. I know we're not going to do any justice to the topic, given how comprehensive and how important it is, over the next 45 minutes or so. But just for a general audience that is curious, just like myself, about why this is such a big deal, just tell us in your own words, how does this actually work? Why have we discovered this only recently? Or maybe we haven't. Maybe we've been doing this for a long time, and now all of a sudden there's a media fascination with it. Just describe to us, what are the mechanics of this? How do we actually integrate them into our own military activities, just in general, but then maybe dive a little bit more deeply into the CENTCOM area of responsibility?
Absolutely. So at a very, very high level, the power and impact of AI is twofold. The first is to ingest large quantities of data and make sense of it. And the second is the potential to create recommendations and better outcomes as a result of that data. I say this frequently, but too much data is the same as no data if you can't pull meaningful insights out of it. And frequently we see that, where it's an embarrassment of riches, where you have all these sensors collecting, or you have open source data available to you, but it becomes white noise. I mean, we experience this on a personal level every day when we interact with technology, but certainly at a scale of the Department of Defense, we experience that, where too much data can become very overwhelming. So AI creates an enhanced turbo version of being able to use that data more effectively. I think it's helpful to describe really specific use cases to be able to understand what AI does, because otherwise it feels like a bit of a amorphous topic. There are really 4 categories that we look at CENTCOM in particular, but I think it's more widely applicable. And I'll list them in order of maturity. Some of these examples, to your point, have existed for many, many years. This is certainly not new, but the more recent models have, such as ChatGPT, have forced us to focus a little bit more on AI. So the first one is answering the simple question of what is it? This could be image, this could be text, but being able to take an image, to read a textual document and be able to extract and understand what is inside of it. What word does that say? Is that a cat on an image? You'll see this for driverless cars that are identifying whether something is a tree or a person as you're going by it. For our purposes, there are a variety of images and full motion video that we need to be able to identify objects out of. So that's sort of the first very basic category, and many of us have been doing that for many, many years, if not decades. The second category is then, if I can identify what it is, what is its context? Where did it come from? What other objects are associated with it? Is it moving from point A to potentially point B? There are understandings of pattern of life that are necessary after that step that AI is also very well equipped to do. Task Force 9 certainly focused on that. So if the first question is, can I identify in a picture a vessel? The second question for what is its context would be, who owns the vessel? Where did it come from? What was its originating port? Is it likely going in this direction? Is it acting in a strange way? Is it moving in a pattern that suggests that it might be engaging in nefarious activity? That's what we try and get at with that second question of context. Yep. The third is then, what do I do about it? So recommendation engine. This again is, we're starting to move down the scale of maturity. This is very early stage, but thinking about, if I can identify a vessel in an image, if I can identify its context of where it came from, what do I do about it? I have X, Y, and Z assets available based on the fuel on board, the crew availability, a couple of other parameters. What would be the best option for us to respond to? And I think we're really just dipping our toe into that possibility. We're discovering that human decision-making is much more complex and much more exquisite, I think, than can ever really be appreciated. I think we talk a lot about AI replacing us for decision-making space. Right. And what we've learned, if anything, from our experiences with recommendation engines is that human brains are taking in thousands, if not millions, of parameters constantly, and sometimes you can articulate them and sometimes you can't. But still, there is opportunity space for AI to augment and to support your decision-making, even if your human brain will apply parameters in an exquisite way that a machine may struggle to. Yeah. And then the final category, of course, has to be the one that has made AI certainly the soup du jour for this year, which is open-ended question, generative models. I'm asking a vague question with an outcome, and it's unclear what structure I need it in, or I may be able to have a flexible template of what I want on the back end. And that, of course, is the least mature. And certainly there are places where we're experimenting, but in very bounded and limited context, because we recognize that the risks associated are not fully understood, that the performance limitations are not fully understood, but still we do believe it's very important for us to contribute in that space so that we can better understand those limiting factors or possibilities for our military context.
Okay, that's fantastic. Well, first of all, announcement, tiny plug for my incoming students: please don't use ChatGPT for your essays. I certainly do not recommend that, but I also know that I'm probably not going to be able to tell a difference. But anyway, which is not true, actually. I might be able to, which gets to your point about human intervention. So just tell me a little bit more. I think it might be most useful to use that tool for the collection. I understand that. And then you said the analysis, and then you said recommendations. At what point does our trust level decrease in this process? Is it more in the analysis phase or in the recommendations phase? Because the collection, I could see that we have a little bit more trust in the machine, but at what point do we apply, human analysis, human intervention, because we want to ensure the best possible outcomes?
I think it's tied to both maturity and complexity. So, and of course, those are related to one another. So when I was describing, when you start getting to recommendations, trust is tied to our ability to understand and identify why something does or does not agree with us. Right. And as you get into the recommendation space, that is much harder and squishier to define. So why we feel or intuit that one course of action is better than another. We may not even fully understand what the breadth of experience that we are pulling forward as humans to be able to make a decision and say this one is better than that one, but then there are really limited parameters that a machine is following the rules for that may not necessarily match to that. And so trust can start falling off as complexity increases. Now that said, trust can go up if you interact with it and if you set expectations accordingly so that somebody understands that the model is going to perform at like 20%. And if you keep working with it, it'll get up to 30. And if you keep working with it, it'll continue to climb from there. So what we've taken away as a command is that our role can be that simultaneously setting expectations for users and then creating a mechanism to allow a model to improve its performance over time. Because otherwise, I think sometimes people think that you just get handed an AI model and it works perfectly and you never have to touch it again. That is not the case. Models have to be cared for and fed in the same way as a child, essentially, or even an intern, perhaps is the better way to describe it, comes in early, may get a lot of things wrong at the beginning, but you understand the intention is that you invest and you spend the time to improve performance with the understanding that further down the road, they will contribute value and save you time. In the same way, we believe that we can support models and we can manage that trust very effectively simply by telling people at the beginning. It's a model that is going to perform at the beginning somewhat poorly. Give us your feedback. We'll keep iterating with it. We'll keep working on it, see if it can improve. I worry sometimes that the AI community frames the discussion around trust as something that has to be pre-built or prepared before it gets handed to a user. And the reality from what we have seen is that trust builds over time in the same way that it does between people. And it can be improved over time if you set expectations early that there will be a performance improvement if you engage with it in certain ways.
Yeah. But that, I don't want to call it lack of trust, but that, suspicion is quite healthy because we're talking about military operations. We're not talking about, writing essays at school. So it's very healthy for us to have a little bit more suspicion or a little bit more oversight over this tool, as impressive as it is. So, which leads me to the following question. So, do you think we are more comfortable using AI in peacetime, in like theater shaping operations, in phase 0, as opposed to, when shots are getting fired? Or that's not necessarily the case? Have we actually used that during wartime?
I would argue that the user community and the military writ large applies the same high level of expectations and careful assessment of risk, regardless of whether it is peace or war. I think that they're in part due to an understanding of the incredible weight and risk associated. And I would argue that there's not a separation because the military in many ways is one of the more risk-averse communities, and that when they engage with a technology like AI, they are going to be exceptionally careful because whether it is AI or another more traditional technology, the understanding is that the stakes are incredibly high and you can't get it wrong. In addition to that, the military is known for implementing incredible structure and procedure to ensure that risk is reduced to whatever extent it can. And that inherently sets bounds on how we can use AI, on the rules that need to be built in and the parameters in which we are able to use it. And so as a user community, again, I think that when folks describe risk, you will actually find that risk is taken more and more seriously the further to the edge that you get, because those are the people who hold the most responsibility and understand and watch the stakes as they rise and fall in front of their eyes.
That's very well said. This might be slightly outside your comfort zone, but I'm still very interested in your take on this. As we look at our own capabilities in this domain, how do they compare to those of our, as we call them in the Pentagon, near peer, and adversaries like the Chinese or the Russians? Are we way ahead? Is there some symmetry there? What's your own take on this?
I think it's important to not over simplify the issue, because in certain ways, asking whether we're ahead of competitors for AI as a category is almost the same as asking whether we're ahead for software, where there is distinction depending on the application. A good example of this is that for facial recognition, China has demonstrated pretty significant capability and also has a long history of working that particular problem set in a way that probably gives them an advantage. Conversely, there's been a lot of studies about generative models and the importance of having a huge amount of text that a model can train itself on, and the limitations on access to all text on the internet in China may put it at a disadvantage for performance of generative models in the long run. And so I think that the short version is that it varies pretty significantly depending on the application, and it is dependent on both the amount of data available and the amount of experience or repetitions and sets that a model can get. And so you'll see, depending on the country's interest, depending on the data available to it, depending on the prioritization of particular applications, you'll see variance in progression.
Perfect answer. Thank you for that. So thanks to you, now we understand better the benefits of AI and their application in the military domain. Now I want to ask you about CENTCOM. Why do you feel that CENTCOM has made an effort to really invest in this, and what are the benefits that you're seeing in the AOR?
I mean, I think that the most important factor that has driven us down this road is urgency. I mean, as I noted before, the reason I'm here, the reason that I am learning so much and feel that I'm able to contribute is because this is a very active AOR. Certainly the last 60 days, but even before that, there are constant operations happening. There is an abundance of data that is being pulled in that eternally verges on being overwhelming unless we can apply thoughtful analytics to it that can pull insights out of it. And so there is an urgency to our theater. There is an urgency to the operations that we conduct that mean that we are particularly interested in this. In addition to that, I think that we have the momentum to be able to serve as what we've described as the battle lab for the department, or the sandbox for the department, no pun intended, because we have task forces that are explicitly focused on technology adoption. We have my office, which is explicitly focused on technology adoption and innovation across the command. We believe that if you set this as a collateral duty, it just won't receive the time and attention. You will not make the progress that you want. You have to have entities and people who are explicitly focused on that. And so that's really why we've made sure to set up task forces, as you've described. So we have Task Force 5-9 for NAVCENT, we have Task Force 3-9 for RCENT, our Army component, and we have Task Force 9-9 for our Air Force component. And those entities are manned and focused exclusively on technology integration. This is such a critical item for them. And so we've done our best to facilitate that. But we think that between the urgency of the problem sets that we have and the mechanisms that we have to drive impact in the AI space, we're well positioned. That said, I do think it's important to constantly note that AI is just a tiny piece of all of the technologies that we're looking at. We believe there is potential for it to have an outsized impact, but we will always be very, very careful and responsible in the way that we go about experimentation. We view AI as one of those less mature technologies that we will put in more controlled experimentation, whereas for some of the others, like unmanned systems that have more maturity, technical maturity under their belts, we're able to move out on this more quickly.
Copy. Okay. Your colleagues may have shared this with you, Sky, but we're going to have an opportunity, a small team from MEI, led by former commander of CENTCOM, Joe Patel, to actually visit those task forces that you just described, hopefully sometime in March of next year. And so we'll go to AFCENT, we'll go to NAVCENT, and we'll go to RCENT. But for those who are less familiar with what these task forces in those component commands are doing, and I know you've had experience with my good buddy Michael Bressor, the former commander of Task Force 59 in NAVCENT. Tell us just a little bit in your own words, what do they actually do? How are they promoting innovation in the AOR? I know that perhaps NAVCENT has gotten more attention in the media, given the cool, surface unmanned vehicles, but there's a good bit of stuff going on also with RCENT and AFCENT. So just maybe like a brief overview of these three and perhaps other entities that are also investing in innovation and using artificial intelligence. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I think it's important to make clear that for those task forces, we've focused them on problems that they're trying to solve, not particular technologies. It's important to not mistake technology as an end state, it's an enabler. And so certainly while task forces like 5-9 have tested the hypothesis that unmanned systems and AI can make a real difference for their operations, they are primarily focused on a problem to solve. And for them, we can start with Task Force 5-9 as they're the most mature. There's this maritime domain awareness.
Yeah.
The problem they're trying to solve is that there is a vast maritime space that has to be covered around the Caribbean Peninsula, and there are, no matter how many assets you had, you wouldn't be able to cover all of it and be able to identify all of the nefarious activity. It's in an incredibly crowded region. There are massive amounts of commercial trade going through all three of those choke points, and so the maritime space, both being able to see it and then to being able to identify nefarious activity that comes out of it, that is the problem set that they're trying to solve. When you look at Task Force 99 for the Air Force, it's a similar problem set, but in the air. Similarly, vast airspace to cover a variety of activities in that airspace, ranging from commercial to military to increasingly, as we've seen in the last 60 days, launching of UAS and other threatening air assets that we need to maintain awareness of. And so Task Force 99 has been looking at the creative ways and the creative space in which you can both understand and see your airspace, identify, and then respond to those threats as we go forward. And then Task Force 39 is actually more focused on a contested logistics flavor of effort, where in the ground for us, it is so critically important to be able to move our various assets and equipment from place to place. There are risks associated with that are certainly not unique to CENTCOM. And so they've been looking at a combination of unmanned systems, of software that can facilitate faster workflows and watching of force flow that will enable our CENT to do their good work on a daily basis. To reiterate that previous point, the problems that I just described are not unique to CENTCOM. If anything, they are experienced at an equal, if not more degree in other theaters. So our theory is that the work that we're doing, the progress that we make with tech integration, is not a CENTCOM unique capability that will never be able to be shared. If anything, we hope and we push very hard to share our lessons learned about how those technologies could help other theaters.
So, Sky, is it fair to say this is obviously mission-driven, threat-based?
Mission-driven, I would say. We are always trying to make sure that we know what problem we're solving. Sometimes there's a very particular threat that we're looking at, but sometimes, as in the case of maritime domain awareness, it's just a requirement to have really strong situational awareness, regardless of what the threat might be.
Got it. Well, this is an opportunity for me to remind the audience to send any questions they might want to ask you. And I do have one that frankly was right on my mind as you were describing what AFCENT, NAVCENT, and RCENT were doing, because obviously these are components that have headquarters on partner nation soil. And so, I was wondering, is this activity all happening, just among U.S. troops, or are we interacting in any way with partners? Are we leveraging our partnerships so that they can actually get ahead with this technology? So let me read to you a question from Abdulaziz Shawaf, which I think is pretty good. How does CENTCOM interact with allies who might not have access to these capabilities? Does it create any shortcomings in collective defense capabilities due to the disparities in technological advancements among allies? So as you very well know, NAVCENT has headquartered in Manama. So what are we doing with the Bahrainis there? RCENT is in Kuwait. What are we doing with the Kuwaitis? And AFCENT, of course, is in Qatar. Same question, are we doing anything with the Qataris, and more broadly with other partners? Just describe to us that kind of interaction or learning experience with those other partners that may not be as fluent in this technology, or perhaps don't even have access to it.
So interestingly, we're actually learning that there is more opportunity to partner in this space almost than existed with traditional capabilities, because the majority, certainly, of what 5.9 is doing, but also what 9.9 and 3.9 are doing, is focused on commercial technologies. There is a hypothesis that there are fully matured and exquisite technical capabilities that commercial sector has been working on for years, that we can leverage in a military sense. Of course, we are going to continue to leverage military technologies, but there is this vast pool of solutions that we want to make sure that we're leveraging. Given that, commercial solutions are a pretty exquisite opportunity to partner with those folks that we have in the region in a really exceptional and paired way that might not exist otherwise, for a variety of reasons. The first is because it's commercial technology. Access to it is perhaps more readily available than it might be for other traditional technologies. The cost is certainly something that is more manageable. A partner of any kind, whether in CENTCOM or outside, might not necessarily be able to invest in a $3 billion destroyer, but they can invest in a commercial USV. of whatever size fleet that they find appropriate, and they can push that forward. And so Admiral Cooper with NAVCENT has stated his goal of having 100 USV fleet, 100 unmanned surface vessel fleet, but the intention of that is 20% US and 80% partnered. There is an understanding that these technologies actually open a door for partnership that might not have existed otherwise, and we've seen incredible advancement both in integration of truly joint capabilities with our partners and also an interest and recognition from our partners of the potential that this type of technology can bring.
Okay. You can imagine that a lot of our partners are going to ask the same question. Is it primarily through DCS, direct commercial sales, that you promote collaboration, cooperation, or some cases actually might require FMS, foreign military sales?
It'll depend on the technology. It'll depend on the exquisiteness, for lack of a better word, of the sensors or the technology that's going into it. But for the most part, again, commercial technologies inherently bring an openness that may not exist for others. They may already have sales to foreign nations because it wasn't in a military context, whether it's for oceanography, for USVs, or for other cases for other types. But there is opportunity space, whether it is through DCS, whether you may have to go the traditional route, for countries to be able to access these technologies at a faster rate than they may have otherwise.
Yeah. And just for the audience to know, the 100 unmanned surface vehicles, that's not theoretical anymore. This is operational now, correct?
We are well on our way to that size fleet right now, yes. We have a very good size fleet currently in Manama for the US, and every day our partners are increasing their own investments in that type of technology. We are very excited to see the progress that particular goal has made.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I sound like Darth Vader because there's a overlap in audio at the end. Before I move on to my next question, I think Patrick Tucker has a really good one. It's a difficult one, I'm warning you. So he's asking about if there are any lessons, Sky, to be learned for the current situation in Gaza, about the opportunities and the limitations of AI for more effective urban warfare operations. So now this is a domain that's, as you know, is incredibly complicated. So is there anything that AI could do to make it a little bit less complicated?
I'll be very mindful of making it clear that, as I noted earlier, AI in our mind is one of the less mature technologies. And so when we get into a crisis, we will more frequently than not put it to the side or use it in very, very select contexts where we feel very certain of the risk associated. What we can certainly use, so for the applications that I described earlier, there were certain areas of imagery detection or text detection internally. There are some more simple workflow processes that we can apply it to where we feel confident that either a model's performance is mature enough that we feel confident in its ability to do it correctly, or our ability to detect when it's done it incorrectly is quite high. So we are very, very careful about where we apply it, particularly in crises. That said, we keep an eye on it, and certainly my team, as the technology-focused group, keeps an eye on what is happening and watching processes where in the future we might be able to apply it. So there are bits and pieces where we are applying AI in the cases where we believe that the maturity has been proven and that we can identify when something is going wrong very quickly and pull it out. And then on the flip side, we can say, given that we are an experimentation-focused command, when the crisis dies down, we will be able to start going back to the teams and saying, hey, I believe that there was this part of your workflow or this part of your process that could be benefit from the application of a more automated solution of something that integrates AI. And so we're saving up those lessons learned, but the first and foremost priority is that we are doing it in a way that limits risk as much possible.
Got it. Thank you for that. I obviously don't have visibility into what's going on in all the other geographic combatant commands. I'm pretty sure they are also making investments in artificial intelligence and more broadly in innovation. But I just get the sense, and you might agree with me on this, that no one is being more aggressive about this than CENTCOM. So do you feel, and of course I have a bias, you have a bias, and I'm not trying to get you in trouble, but do you feel like the command is becoming this center of excellence or like this source of lessons for ideas about innovation and about artificial intelligence for the other geographic combatant commands?
We certainly hope to. I don't want to overstate where we can or cannot apply our lessons to the other combatant commands, but at a bare minimum, what we do is constantly and aggressively reach out to our counterparts at the other combatant commands, to our counterparts in OSD and the Joint Staff, to make sure that they are at least aware of the work that we're doing. And if there are spaces where they believe that their operations could benefit, that they can and have that toolkit really readily available for them to pull in. I do think that CENTCOM has been moving out on this exceptionally quickly. I think that there are a couple of reasons for that. I think that it would be hard to understate the impact of having someone like General Kurilla at the head of this organization, who is so exceptionally focused on innovation, who is so encouraging of folks running experimentation, of trying, of failing fast, of moving forward, failing fast and failing forward. We also have the mechanisms in place, again, with the task forces. We have 90-day sprints that we run at the headquarters level that facilitates that movement. We have the pieces in place, I think, that allows us to move at speed. And so I think the best that we can do is share not only the technology lessons that we're learning, but also those broader mechanisms that other combatant commands can learn from. And we've been encouraged by the interactions that we've had and the bits and pieces that they've pulled from us.
Copy. Before I move on to my next question, I have one from a dear friend of mine, a superstar, and also a former commander of CENTCOM, to just tell you how much interest there is in what you're saying, Sky. This is from Joe Votel. And he's very interested in what advice you might have to the units that you visit about how they can create an environment or a culture that embraces cutting edge, technology like AI or autonomy.
Thank you, sir, for your question. Of course, we are always incredibly appreciative of your support to the command. I think that there are a couple of elements that we try to highlight when we go out, and whenever I go forward and meet with these teams, we'll try and give a couple of specific recommendations. The first, as noted previously, is that having a mechanism, having a team or an individual that is exclusively focused on this is really important. It falls to the wayside otherwise. We really believe you have to have a dedicated team. The second is providing mechanisms, and by mechanisms I mean either headquarters events that people can now be aware of, that they can participate in. Those can be exercises. Those can be events like Innovation Oasis, which is a series that we hold that allows people to bring their good ideas and potential solutions all the way up to General Kurilla. Those are resources like skills or coders or cloud engineers that we can reach back and pull forward to them as they need. So making sure that they have the toolkits that they need to be successful, we think is important. But then finally, and one of the most important pieces in my mind, is to encourage them to be ruthlessly specific in their prioritization of problem sets. I think that innovation as a culture is so critically important to get all of that creative energy out, and at the same time, you have to make sure that you know out of all of those good ideas that come out, which ones are going to be focused, because otherwise you risk becoming a mile wide and an inch deep. And so identifying through your leadership of looking around at your scenario of what is the most critical problem that you have to solve allows you to then apply all of those other pieces that I described to you, of the resources we will give you, of the mechanisms where you can test and iterate, of the teams that will have that focus to create a meaningful impact over the long run rather than chasing a couple of different shiny objects.
Fair enough. To your point about not overstating, Sky, just like everything else, nothing's perfect. There's got to be challenges. There's got to be risks to this tool that we're using. Describe to us what those are. And then the second part of this question, how do we actually go about reducing or minimizing the risks and the challenges?
For AI specifically, I think there are two risks, one of which is they're somewhat different. The first is very candidly that while AI holds an incredible amount of promise, performance is still quite up and down. And why I feel comfortable saying that, and at the same time driving experimentation with our command, is because nobody will catch errors faster than the users who are forward using it. When they have their traditional process of looking for a maritime vessel that is behaving unusually or looking for a particular image, they will identify it very quickly, and they will tell you quickly if something is going poorly. But I think that it's important to be clear about the advancement of how mature or not mature AI is, and the reality is that for a lot of applications, we are just dipping a toe in. We see the potential. It is incredible. We will continue to engage in experimentation and invest in that capability for what it will offer us down the road. But the simple reality is that many AI applications are not very mature, and we have to be honest about that, because if we fail to express that reality and set expectations to users, to technology developers, or otherwise, we risk wasting time. We risk not delivering capability that is actually meaningful. I don't care if the department develops 100 models if none of those 100 delivers capability impact on the end. So keeping the focus on what the impact, the operational impact of it is critically important. And I think the challenge at present is genuinely a technical one, that a lot of models are not yet performing at the level that creates meaningful impact for folks. The second challenge, I think, is that, as I described earlier, models require care and feeding. You can't just throw them over the wall to a user and then they sit there and they're perfect. We've watched models perform exquisitely at the beginning, and then you watch the performance degrade as the model starts to drift. And so a challenge that we have to address is setting the mechanism that allows for consistent model performance. And that's a combination of technical expectations for the developers at the beginning. It's a combination of mechanisms that allow you to check performance regularly so it doesn't fall off. It's a culture issue of having to talk to the users and explaining to them this: you cannot be passive. You have to be actively engaged with this model for it to sustain or increase in its performance. You have to give us your feedback. You have to have these mechanisms to check progress. Otherwise, we will constantly have this backslide problem of putting a model forward and saying, oh, we did it, a model is working perfectly, and then watching it backslide if we don't tend to it in the way that it needs to. So there are a lot of challenges associated with AI. There's no question. There are technical challenges, there are policy challenges, there are maintenance challenges, but at the same time, we see the potential. There is immense potential for what this can do with the sheer volume of data and the importance of the work that we're doing, not just at CENTCOM, but the rest of the department. And for that reason, we are committed to continuing experimentation because A, the capability is going to save lives, it's going to save time, and B, we believe that users are the place where we can make the most progress, that we can improve those capabilities best. You have to have realistic users in a realistic environment to improve this capability over.
There's obviously one Sky at CENTCOM, and I wonder if you have a team working with you, or at least you've started to develop a community of technologists that down the road are going to make your life a little bit easier, your job a little bit easier. What's your sense of that? And are you facing a resources problem on that front, or it's not a resource issue? It's more of a, it's a process, and not everybody has that kind of training, and it's just a matter of time. Tell us a little bit about the personnel who are working on this issue beyond Sky.
To be clear, nothing that has happened at this command is because of me alone. There is nothing that I do, there is no project that I run that moves forward because of me alone. I am incredibly fortunate for the partners, for the team that I have. I have a very small team here for the Chief Technology Office, but more importantly, the partners outside of the joint directorates of the components, and then outside in the department, whether it's Defense Innovation Unit and a CDAO and others who have facilitated us in ways that would be impossible for one person alone to do. I actually view my role as being successful if I make myself irrelevant. The point is that any project that I run is co-piloted with the actual user, because I'm not the user. If AI is successful, I'm not the person who's going to use it at the back end or feel the impact or feel my time is saved, that that I am safer when I wake up, that I am able to execute my job better. Those people are forward. And so if I do my job correctly, I will identify the person who will benefit from it. I will partner with them as I build these projects with my team, and then we will hand it off and we will drift away as they use it and run it forward. So we've had a couple of examples of being able to do that successfully in the last year that have made me encouraged, because the last thing that I want to do is have a chief technology office that creates all of these incredible fancy capabilities that no one then touches, that no one feels an impact from. That would be failure in my mind. I'm actually successful if I work myself out of a job by creating technologies and the off-ramp and the mechanism for the traditional structure of the command to be successful, and find those capabilities and implement them with or without me.
Now that I think of it, it's pretty cool that you have a functional job within a geographic combatant command. So two-part question. First, I wonder if you interact with counterparts of yours in other geographic combatant commands, and if they even exist. And second, is there a dialogue? And then second, how much do you interact with the other functional commands? Like, do you get insights from them? Do they help you in your job? Because it seems to me like a natural alliance for you, someone who's working on functional issues, and you might want to look at functional commands and see what they could provide you to make your job easier. So cooperation on that front, but also do you have counterparts in, let's say, Indo-PACOM, EUCOM, or other geographic combatant commands?
Yeah. So currently, I'm the only CTO for a geographic combatant command. I believe CENTCOM has one. All of the combatant commands do have chief data officers. So we have a chief data officer within my office that typically facilitates with his counterparts. But there is not a one-for-one everywhere, although we certainly hear folks increasingly being interested in setting up roles like that. So what I'll do is wherever there is a team that is working on tech integration, whether it's their J8 or otherwise, that's who I'll usually connect with, or any individual really that's just interested in pushing this forward. Because at the end of the day, you know, what we're describing as innovation and tech adoption doesn't belong to one entity at any command. Within my own command, I almost on a daily basis work with nearly all of the joint directorates and the components. There are different solutions that all of them need that are equally important for this to come together and for us to function as an organization. And so, to me, I am almost less concerned about having a counterpart, because the actual question is, what is the problem we are collectively trying to solve, and who is the person who happens to be responsible for solving that problem at another command? When looking at other functional combatant commands, when I engage with them, it's more candidly for my own education, where they will have exquisite knowledge in a particular space or domain that allows me to then build my network, so that when there a problem comes up that we need to solve, or a solution that's requested from the rest of the command here, I at least have the knowledge of an expert I can reach back to. I'm under no delusion that I will ever be the expert on every technology. I'm very comfortable with the idea that the best role I can serve is as a facilitator and as a network, where if you touch me, I will quickly be able to reach out at least to one person, maybe two, who will be able to help you with it.
You know, as I listen to you, Sky, describe the promise of AI and some of the challenges, and I know it sounds like a commercial, so I don't want to oversimplify it, but what is, in your mind, like the next big thing in AI that will take it to the next level? What is the North Star, as we call it, for AI that will be just groundbreaking when it comes to any military activities that CENTCOM or any other branch of the military does?
I have said this before, and I realize that people like focusing on the applications of AI that are more flashy, whether it's kinetic or cyber, even generative models. Although generative models fit into the category I'll describe, but I really think that the potential for AI is going to be an application to day-to-day tasks. There is so much time that we spend as human beings, even that is not exclusive to the military, but it certainly applies to the military, of doing rote paperwork, of just basic tasks that pull so much time out of your day, so many hours out of your day, that your exquisite human brain could be doing something else with. As I described earlier, our interactions with models, particularly recommendation models, but certainly others, have highlighted for me what a just priceless resource our human brains are. And I look at our command group, and I look at the exquisite expertise of people who have been in this theater doing this type of work for decades, that it is so difficult to quantify and replace. And what I want is for them to clear off their plate all of those menial tasks, anything else that they would be doing, and focus their attention on those decisions and on that high complexity thought process that they are so well equipped for. So AI, to me, the big impact is going to be when we start focusing on those tasks that remove that rote menial labor off of our plate and allow us to spend our time on more meaningful aspects. I realize that is a potentially an unpopular take. I realize that there are shiny applications that people want AI to do. I have no doubt that there will be a future for those, but I really think that the true impact that we will feel in the long run is when we apply AI to tasks that are otherwise burning hours of our day for very little.
No, that's a fantastic answer, Sky. We have roughly 5 minutes left, so I want to do three things, if you don't mind. I've got one more question from a very attentive and loyal Abdulaziz, who has now asked us multiple questions. So I'm going to give him some credit and actually take his second question, even though it might be just a little bit outside of the topic that we're dealing with today. So I will ask that, and then I will ask you a question about advice for young professionals, students who might be interested in following the path that you've taken. If you could share with them any advice in terms of how to specialize at an early age, what kind of programs do you recommend in academia, or just any other activities that they can do to place themselves, position themselves to better understand this very important trend in security affairs. And then finally, I want to give you the opportunity to share, final thoughts. So let's just go to the question first with Abdulaziz. With cyber warfare increasingly becoming more prevalent, how does CENTCOM ensure that this technology is not vulnerable to adversaries? So let's just start with that question, and we'll move to the other two.
It's an important one, there's no question. I mean, as I noted, AI relies on large volumes of data, and increasingly those large volumes of data come from the open source, which increases its own risk. And additionally, you have developments like generative AI increasing the risk of injection of false information at a volume that previously was not imagined. So there is no question that there is risk in the cyberspace. That said, I think that there are certainly advancements that have been made in this space that whether it's zero trust architecture and application of really more exquisite controls of our networks, whether there is a better understanding of what risks are and better awareness, better autonomous monitoring of our networks. There are a lot of solutions that are being explored right now across the Department of Defense, certainly not just at CENTCOM, but we certainly acknowledge that there is significant, has been and will always continue to be significant risk in the cyber domain that we will also always have to be very mindful of.
Okay. And any advice for young professionals, students who might be interested in this topic and who would love to, have a career in this?
Sure. A couple of thoughts. The first is that the way that I have chosen positions consistently for the last 4 or 5 jobs is by identifying a gap in my own personal skill set that I then aim to fill. And I think that has allowed me to have a fairly well-rounded approach to this, where, as I noted earlier, I went into aerospace and defense consulting because I felt that I was quantitatively not strong. 3 years of building out predictive models to help fix that. That I then realized that there was a policy element that I was missing, and a holistic view of the department. So the Defense Innovation Board helped me fill out that gap. I realized that there was a congressional angle of this that was critically important and increasingly was either a make or break as to whether technology moves forward. The congressional experience was important. And then, of course, the one that I've thought out for the last couple of years is the operator perspective of, gosh, I'm making a lot of recommendations about the types of technologies that should be used. I better understand and have a good network of people who understand the problem set better than anyone else. So I would recommend to any young professional to really self-reflect on the perspectives that you think are critically important to be able to advise, especially in the technology space, and then hunt down positions that allow you to, if not get that experience yourself, access people who have that experience. I think that is certainly one piece. And then the second is a very simple one, but just being quick to ask questions and acknowledge when you don't know something. In the technology space and national security, I think that there is frequently risk of being afraid of admitting that you don't know something, despite the fact that the reality is that it is a new space. Maybe there are technologies that have been worked on for decades. Maybe national security is a field that is extremely well developed and spent a lot of time. But in combination, the reality is that very few of us have handled the problem sets that we're talking about. And acknowledging that allows us to find a solution faster. And if you can be the person who asks the right questions and sets the stage to ask those questions and get to the solution faster, I think that may be part of the process to move forward, because I will be the first to raise my hand and ask what I may view as a stupid question, but then often many people didn't know the answer to. And in the technology space, So much time, I think, is sometimes lost by folks that either over-assert their knowledge in the technical domain or over-assert their knowledge in the operational domain, and then cross-talk and then miss one another, and you spend hours trying to get down to a ground truth that could have been reached a little bit earlier if someone had just asked a very simple and basic question and admitted, I don't know the answer to that. Can you help me fill my knowledge gap? So perhaps those two are related. Finding positions that allow you to fill out gaps in your knowledge and your skill set, and on a tactical level, constantly asking those questions, constantly helping those around you ask those hard questions that may feel uncomfortable because you have to admit that you don't know a particular area. But those two, especially for young professionals, I think are critically.
Okay. Before I thank you, Sky, for your time today and for your precious insights. I mean, this has been such an incredibly fascinating conversation. I want to ask you if you have any final thoughts.
As always, related to your last question, I will always put out the call to anybody who is watching or listening. If you are interested in national security, especially if you're interested in national security and technology, we actively ask you to come and join and contribute in whatever space that might look like for you. If it is private sector tech companies that are contributing in the national security space, if it is in the legislative branch, if it is in the Department of Defense or otherwise, there is no mission set that is more critically important, and there is no community that is a better community to be a part of truly than what we do, not just at CENTCOM, but the broader Department of Defense. We always need talented, passionate individuals of all ages to contribute in this space. And I'm so fortunate and lucky to wake up and work with those people every day, but we really ask that people contribute. And then second, of course, is just looking at CENTCOM. But I hope that people come away from this thinking of CENTCOM as that innovation and technology adoption sandbox, that there is possibility for users and for realistic environments to play a critical role in technology development, and that CENTCOM can certainly pave a pathway, and other combatant commands can do the same to allow us to integrate those critical capabilities that are going to save time and save lives.
Guy, we're incredibly proud of you. We're so fortunate to have you at CENTCOM. Thank you for all your contributions, and thank you for your time today. We wish you the best of luck, and next time you're in DC, please look us up, and then we'll be happy to see you again. Okay, thank you for your time.